Hey everyone, it's Richard Metalfan here, bringing you guys a brand new 2022 album review. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from the band Amorphis entitled Halo, which is out now through Atomic Fire Records. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you are aware of Amorphis. They've been around since the early 90s from Finland. And starting out, they were kind of a typical death metal band from Finland. Mostly, I think their first incarnation of Amorphis, they were called Abhorrence, which is sort of like the early version of the Amorphis. And then their first album was more just straight up death metal. But it wasn't until the second album, Tales from a Thousand Lakes, which in my opinion is still my favorite Amorphis album, they sort of like getting away from the death metal and eventually just dropping the death metal almost entirely. But I feel like they've circled it back to a little bit with their more recent few albums, and it has some of that elements there, but at this point you can't really call Amorphis a death metal band really. And overall, this is the band's 14th album, and this follows up their previous album, which came out in 2018, called Queen of Time. And does this album kind of live up or exceed what Queen of Time has? I think it's a pretty solid album. I just think they've really, with every album Amorphis has done, I feel like they've definitely evolved, definitely incorporated different elements instrumentally. And I just think it almost feels like I'm listening to a different band when it comes to each album. The production on this album is pretty good. You could definitely hear the instruments pretty well for the most part. Let's just talk about like the vocals. I think Tommy Josten's vocals are really great. I just love his growling is very powerful, really has a lot of emotion. Like, I think the screaming and harsh vocals add a lot of emotion, as well as like the clean vocals. I feel like the clean vocals are very epic sounding. Just it's just hard to describe it. One thing to note is also the guitar riffs on this album is great. Tommy K and Essa come up with some really great riffs, and the bass on this album I wish was a little bit audible from Ollie, but I'm pretty sure he's doing a great job slapping the bass. And the keyboards from Sensory, and I always say this a lot with bands that have keyboard players, I feel like the keyboards add a lot of like depth to the music and a lot of like atmosphere. And then the drumming from Jan just is really great. So without further ado, let's dive into this album track by track. Now, starting things off is Northwards. Now, it pretty much sets a good impression with slow key and orchestral intro before going into like a full-fledged barreling melody. And this song is a very mixed bag in terms of like the tools and the sound that the band has used, with sort of like particular standouts, like the instrumental interlude in the middle of the song, which is played on a typical kind of like guitar keyboard duet, and then there's a choir break towards the end of the song. But overall, I think it's a great way to start off Halo. And then we move on to On the Dark Waters. Now, this has, for the most part, a very classic kind of like rock feel to it. It has a very catchy riff in the verses that will just get stuck in your head once it's finished. But the real strength is like the really great melodies in the chorus and like the harmony riffs in that bridge as well. Next song on the album is called The Moon, which is the first single released from Halo. And it sort of like brings sort of like a more kind of like nuanced and sound to the album. And there's like hard punching riffs that are filled with groove, and there's some harsh spoken lyrics in the verses that brings sort of like a real kind of like dichotomous weight for the cleanly sung chorus. And there's like emotive harmonies that pretty much ties everything all together. And then there's some female vocalizing over like the instrumental section, which gives the song sort of like good variation. And while it's one of the slower offerings on here, or pretty much in their entire discography, I feel like it's a standout distinctly on Halo. Next up is Windmane. Now, this seems like a fairly standard Amorphis song until it possibly hits one of the best instrumental solos on the album. And there's the interplay with the guitar and the keyboards for this section is really great, and it pretty much creates a great impression which builds into the song ending. Next song on the album is called A New Land. Now, this song pretty much sounds like, again, your standard melodic death metal fare with like powerful melodic opening that builds into like a barreling verses before converging together for an impactful sing-along chorus. And there's like a prominent Middle Eastern influence running throughout this song, and there's like a sitar solo which demonstrates sort of like the uniqueness of Amorphis's instrumental abilities and the soundscape visions for this album. Next up is When the Gods Came. Now this song has a beautiful added keyboard melodies which accompanies it throughout, and this is easily the most fun chorus for the record to sing along to, which makes it just, I don't know, it's just a fun track live whenever they play this song live. Next song on the album is called Seven Roads Come Together, which is interesting that this is the 7th track and the 7th track is called Seven Roads Come Together. It just sounds funny to me. Now, this song definitely feels like an interconnection of all the tracks that we've heard so far, and this is, in my opinion, possibly one of Amorphis' strongest tracks in its discography. Its melodic rich introduction and the chorus are really good, and although these sections feel directly at odds with the track's hard-hitting bass oriented verses, it just works really well with all the weird like time signature changes. Next up is War. Now this song is a pretty standard Amorphis song. The magic only happens midway through with the beautiful section with like the grand choirs and things started to shift around again. I feel like this song needed a few spins in order to like fully appreciate it. And then we get to the title track of the album, Halo. Now this pretty much changes the pace for being one of the fully clean vocal songs on this album. It has a really meticulous pacing, and the lyrical content sort of like it invokes sort of like a very vivid imagery, and the orchestral elements before the solo really stand out, and the fusion with like the male and female vocals on this song bring a very powerful kind of like aura to this song, and it's just fucking great. Next up is The Wolf. Now The Wolf so far is like the heaviest song on the album, with the groovy bass line which carries it throughout, and some really just goes throughout the whole runtime. And the melodies in the chorus and the bridge are very rich and vibrant, and there's the brief inclusion of a choir is pretty unexpected. And then we close things out with My Name is Night. Now it pretty much wraps up the album with a wonderful fusion of Amorphis' sounds in ballad form, and there's like the back and forth between male and female vocals over like the slower paced music, which makes it for like a very beautiful melancholic offering, and it has some really great lyrical content, and this song just comes with just so much emotion and musical richness that just perfect way to cap off this album. Now overall, Halo by Amorphis is another standout in their discography, another evolution in their sound. So rather than give this album a score, I'm going to give Halo by Amorphis a solid 8 out of 10. So yep, that's my review of the new Amorphis, guys. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the album, and I'll see you all in the next video. And as always, keep it metal. Kitos.